This is topics 3.1, 3.2, 3.3 from the course and exam description for AP Environmental Science. All right, so our learning goal or target is at the top here, and it is to identify the differences between generalist and specialist species. So make sure that you're filling in your study guides or learning objective papers while we go through this presentation. All right, so remember that species have a preferred range for survival. That was from Unit 2 when we studied ecological tolerance and range of tolerance. We have two types of species here. We have generalists and specialists. These are two categories. And a koala here in this picture would be considered a specialist, whereas a raccoon would be considered a generalist. So generalists can live in lots of different environments. A raccoon probably originally lived in a forest, but can live around humans in neighborhoods, in sewers, lots of different types of food, scavenge things. Koala bears are very specific. They live in Australia in the eucalyptus forest. They eat eucalyptus leaves, and it's a very specialized diet and a very specialized location. Okay, so our generalists can live in a wide range. So you can see on this our range of tolerance kind of a graph. It's a very general graph. For example, here's temperature. Performance is being able to survive, grow, and reproduce here. And a generalist would have these green bands, so they can live in more and survive and grow and reproduce in more temperature conditions, whereas a specialist might be more limited to a very small temperature range. So that might be an example. Okay, so generalists are organisms that have a wide range of tolerance, environmental conditions. We've been talking about that with the last several slides. So here's some more detail about that. Lots of different foods, that's the diet. Lots of different habitats, like this coyote. Here, this looks like a western coyote to me, not an eastern. And a western coyote can live in the chaparral. It can live in the forest. It can live in suburban neighborhoods, usually in suburban neighborhoods with some wild areas nearby. It can eat all kinds of foods. It can be scavengers. It can eat dead foods, live foods. Raccoons, bobcats, coyotes are all types of generalists. Could be an invasive species. A lot of invasive species are generalists because they can survive in a lot of different conditions. If habitats change, they're more likely to survive because they have a wide range of niches they can occupy. And then here's our specialists. So a panda is another example. Panda eat bamboo, so they're endemic to the bamboo forests in China. Specialized diet, only eat a few things. Narrow habitat, koalas, Canadian lynx, pandas. Now these ones are more likely to become endangered or threatened because they have a limited diet. They can't survive change very much, so if their habitats change, if their diets change, it's hard. They survive better in stable habitats, and they're more likely to be impacted by climate change for all of the reasons listed here. Okay, so now let's talk about the differences between K and R. So K is a capital K, represents carrying capacity. So those are species that tend to be in and around their carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is something that you learned in biology classes, but we'll review it again in a later topic here in this upcoming week. R refers to the fact that it's a rapidly growing population. So let's get into the details about those things. Okay, so as populations grow, we have what's called a population growth rate. Sometimes it's called intrinsic growth rate or a crude growth rate. So these are synonyms-ish for the same type of vocabulary. It's basically how many babies you have, which is the number of offspring an individual can produce in a given time period, minus the deaths of the individuals in the population in the same time period. All right, so Scientists also have this word called biotic potential. So it's in ideal conditions, how many babies can you have that survive? Now, some species have really high biotic potential. Humans have low. Humans can really only have one baby a year. I mean, you could say 9 months, but a mother has to kind of recover from that birth before really possible to get pregnant, although, you know, that's a generality. There's always exceptions to the rule. So humans have low biotic potential. A woman in her lifetime can't produce 100 children. Maybe some women can produce 20, but most cannot. However, mama bunny rabbits can produce probably 6 litters a year with 10 each, so 60 offspring in a year. So that would be considered high biotic potential. Think of plants and seeds. A plant that produces seeds, an oak tree that produces acorns, a pine tree that produces pine cones. There are hundreds to thousands in a year, so plants usually have very high biotic potential. All right, here's a chart. Here are characteristics of K and R selected species. So you do need to know. Now, pause the video and read through it. Jot down some notes to remember. Basically, a K-selected species, think of humans, long lifespan. Takes a long time to reproductive maturity, so about 15 years before humans can have children. Not very many children in a lifespan. Usually larger offspring. Parents have to take care of the kids. They can't just abandon them. Some species, you lay the eggs, like sea turtles, the eggs hatch, and mama's not there. Mama went back to the sea. So that is low parental care. So a sea turtle would be an R-selected species. Now, some R-selected species, like mice, the mom is there for a little while, but not that long, but she does take care of it for a little while, the babies. Some, they lay their eggs or reproduce, and they just don't do anything with them, and some species. Okay, so slow to reproduce, takes a long time. 1 or 2 babies at a time, lots of parental care, that's R-selected. Pretty much the opposite, that's K-selected, R-selected is pretty much the opposite of that. Now, there are some species that fall in between, so there's a continuum here. And let's take a look at the continuum here. So down here in this picture, I have, on this side of the image, I have R, and this side we have K. So there's a continuum. So like a rabbit is kind of in between. It's more R than K, but not as much as like an oyster that produces 500 million eggs for that oyster in a year. And this tuna fish produces 6,000 eggs in a year. So there are extremes on either end. Some species fall in between. But I would say this puma, this chimpanzee, elephants, whales, all fall up here in K. I would say, in my opinion, that the rabbits, frogs, fish, tuna, oysters are all R-selected if you had to make a delineation, although sometimes there's stuff in between. Like, for example, the mama bunny does give some parental care, so that's why it's kind of in between R and K, whereas these oysters and the fish don't give parental care. That's why it's way over here in R. Okay, R-selected tends to remain around their carrying capacity. We'll talk about that later in the topic. R-selected lives by their biotic potential. They reproduce more than maybe their resources can sustain them. Also, lots of their babies are food for other species. Okay, so more information. K-selected are more adversely affected by invasive species, so they reproduce slowly. So if there's invasive species, it's a hard time recovering from that. However, invasive species tend to be R-selected. Endangered species could be both R or K. Okay, so here's some more about R and K. R-selected tend to grow really large and fast and they can die only to grow and die back again. That's called overshoot. So again, here's carrying capacity. You learn that in biology. And R-selected tend to make too many babies, and then they're eaten by lots of predators and they die, or they run out of resources and they die back. So R-selected tend to do this way more than K-selected, although there are instances where K-selected does this too. And then this graphic is some more information, a repeat of a lot of information. All right, next we have survivorship curves. And let me actually go here to show you the survivorship curves. We have three types of survivorship curves, type 1, 2, and 3. And let me go back a slide to show you now. Okay, so type 1 survivorship curve shows high survival over time, large numbers of death in old age. Humans are type 1, whales, gorillas, elephants. Type 2, constant death rate over their entire lifespan. So you don't have any more chance of dying when you're young or old. Type 3, high death rate early life with few individuals reaching adulthood. Okay, so we have this, I don't even know what that is, this big fish, lamprey. Maybe that's not a normal fish. That's probably one that has few offspring. Type 1, lots of parental care, not very many deaths, high death rate when you're old. Low death rate when you're young, high when you're old. Humans are type 1, gorillas, elephants, things like that, type 1. Type 2, squirrels, lots of birds fit into type 2. Means there's equal chance of dying when you're old and when you're young. Type 3, mostly R-selected species, high chance of death when you're young, like frogs and tadpoles. Most tadpoles are eaten before they survive. All the seeds that are produced by trees, plants, etc., most of them are eaten by other species. They're food. Hardly any survive, but if you do survive, think about an acorn. Oak trees produce thousands and thousands of acorns. Maybe 1 in 5,000 might sprout into an oak tree, but if that 1 in 5,000 does sprout, it's going to live a long time. And you can see that here. Same thing with sea turtles. A sea turtle mama will lay a nest every year with 100 sea turtles. They hatch into the sand, they run to the ocean, they try and not be eaten, only a few make it, and if you make it to adulthood, you live over 100 years. So that would be type 3. All right, so that is all you need to know for topics 1, topics 3.1, 3.2, and 3.3. Make sure you refer to your study guide and your learning targets to make sure you know them all for your next quiz.